Welcome to the Married People Podcast, where we help you make marriage real, fun, and simple. Each week, we have honest conversations about one simple thing that can make your marriage better. Because when your marriage is better, everything's better. I'm CJ, and this week on the Married People Podcast, we're talking about how adoption and foster care impact our marriages. My co-host Ted Lowe recently had a chance to sit down with Katie Edwards to talk about this topic. Now, Katie has been working with junior high students for over 21 years at one of the largest churches in the country, Saddleback Church. That's where Rick Warren is the pastor. Now, Katie and her husband Ron are not only a part of Saddleback Church, but have also been foster parents and have 3 children of their own, 2 of which they adopted. Now, adoption and foster care can bring really unique challenges to marriages. That's why we're excited for you to hear from Katie, because she and her husband have been there, and they're really intentional about making their marriage a priority in the midst of the fostering and the adoption process, which they believe prioritizing their marriage in the midst of all that is the best thing they can do for their kids. So without further ado, let's jump into Ted's interview with Katie.
I am here with Katie Sadler Edwards. That's what I used to say, right? Every time I say Katie Sadler, that's what I always used to say.
Yes, I know.
Because we've known each other, Katie.
Like 100 years.
100 years. But the difference is you don't age. And so when you'll see people you haven't seen in a while, you go, oh, wow, they're looking older. Katie, you never do that. So I don't know what you've done there. But so we worked together at Saddleback Church.
Yeah.
You're still in youth ministry there, right?
Yes, totally. I know. We met so long ago. Well, I was an intern, I think, when we first met. And an intern at Saddleback, I was 19. And I'm something now.
Yeah, there you go.
And yeah, it was so fun you were like such a mentor for me early on. We were talking earlier about you helped me write my very first sermon that I preached.
Well, I'm telling you what, the student has definitely exceeded the teacher, because you just have such a gift at communicating.
So I'm kind of your legacy in some way. So you should be so proud.
I don't do anything else good right there.
I made it.
You made it.
I'm doing okay.
Hey, now you're like this middle school guru.
Oh man, I love middle school. Yeah, so I'm the middle school pastor at Saddleback, and I just celebrated my 22nd anniversary at the church, which I love because I just love being in the church love middle school. I oversee junior high, high school, and college now, so technically student ministries, but I lead from the junior high chair because I love it. So that
was so your heart then, and it's just remained all these years. What do you think?
I love that phase. I just love the front end of the adolescent process. I really do. I just love the discovery. I love the changeover in the brain between concrete and abstract thinking. I just love, it's like this big corner turn plot twist. It's like your first kind of plot twist in the church where you really kind of take it from childhood faith to my own faith. And it's just such a lovely transition to be a part of. So
great.
Sorry, I know this podcast is not about middle school.
No, but I love it because it's so where your heart is.
I do love it. And I'm also a satisfied customer because I have 3 kids. So my 2 girls are in high school, so they've come through our middle school ministry, which was just so fun to be.
Were they cool with that? Were they cool with mom being the boss?
Yeah. I mean, that is kind of the nice thing about maybe being in a little bit of a larger context is they didn't have to be with me all the time. But yeah, we had a blast. We just had a blast together. I was so sad when it came to an end. So. But now they're in high school, which is awesome. And our high school ministry is awesome. So
it's a whole different phase right there, right?
I know.
Well, Katie, I've known you and Ron since way back in the day. Ron was a high school volunteer when I was on staff at Saddleback there. And so, and Ron, I'm sure, as you will attest to, is one of the greatest humans on the planet as well.
He is.
So we were all very excited when the 2 of you got together. We're like, whoa, what's this going to be like? Because both of you have such a huge heart for kids and just people, and just but you guys are very, very different.
Yeah, he's a super introvert, and I'm an extrovert. But he's a 4th grade teacher. He's been a 4th grade teacher for 25 years. So we just have kids in kind of every corner of our life. And so, the church is near his public school that he teaches at. So that's really fun. We even find ourselves ministering to the same kids.
So fun.
And he very much so looks at his classroom like a ministry, which is really cool. But yeah, he's gentle and introverted, but he's like 6'7", and he's giant. So But he's the best. He's wonderful. We've been married almost 20 years, which is so cool and fun and wonderful and awesome, and I love him.
Well, we love it that you guys found each other, that's for sure. You guys are a force apart, but definitely together. And you said kids have always been a part of your life. And Katie, one of the things we have to do in this podcast is, focus in and make marriage real and fun and simple. And we know we have a lot of different listeners coming from a lot of different contexts, but you guys have an incredible story of faith, love, and supporting each other through adoption. And we know that with our listeners, there's a lot of people in the space, whether that's they're thinking through the lens of infertility, or they're thinking through the lens of fostering, or maybe adoption. That's part of their story. And so we know people are at different places with that. But your story, I think, just speaks so well on so many levels. I think it speaks to the differences of you and Ron. And just the process of this. But I would love it if you could share your story with us.
Yeah, so we have one biological daughter. She's a senior in high school. She's 18. And we actually were really content with just having one kid. And when Abby was around like 5 or 6, she came to us and she said she was lonely and she really wanted a sibling. And so that was the first time I can remember ever praying about adoption or like thinking about it. And so we just, kind of started to chat about it a little bit. Ron was kind of resistant in the beginning and really hesitant. It just sounded and felt messy to him. And like there was lots of strings attached and there was pain attached and things like that he just doesn't want to feel things he doesn't have to. So we started a process to internationally adopt, and it actually fell through kind of quickly. And the country that we wanted to adopt in changed their laws, and we were kind of axed out of the process.
And how long have you been in that process?
We were about 6 months in.
Oh, wow. So there's a lot of heart there.
There was definitely we were down a road, but hadn't been matched with a kid yet. So, there were some people affected in that process who had been matched and told no. And so we felt like God kind of spared us a little bit from some heartbreak there. But we were still kind of lost a little bit. We're like, what do we do? We thought we were maybe going to adopt. And so we had a friend come to us and suggest looking into adopting. So being foster parents to adopt. And Ron was like, absolutely not. No way.
Because you guys had been foster care.
We hadn't done anything yet.
Okay.
And so he was like, no way. We're going to be dealing with like so many layers of things and social workers and birth parents. And he was open to international adoption because it felt like there were no strings attached.
That makes sense.
That it was just going to be a kind of clean thing, which it's being on the other side of adoption. It's funny that we thought that. But so I said, let's just go to this class. We're just going to go to a class and hear about it. It was just an information night to hear about fostering to adopt. And he was so resistant. So he's like, I don't think so. But we went, and that class really kind of changed our life because we heard about all the needs in our county. There's 4,000 kids in California's foster system, which is where we're from. Wow. And in our own county, there was about 800 kids needing placement. So it just was an eye-opening thing for us. We just had no idea what was happening in our own backyard, and God just started to do something in us. And we left that night, and I looked at Ron, and I'm like, what do you think? And he was like, I don't know if we can turn our backs on this. Like, I don't know if we can walk away from this and not do something about it.
So, Kate, let me back you up just for a second. Because I think a lot of our listeners are in a place where they feel like that there's not necessarily a need or there's kids. Because you live in South Orange County, which is probably one of the most wealthy or the most expensive real estate in the country. Where are they hiding? You know what I mean? Like, where's all that hidden in the beauty that is South Orange County?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one of the things about Orange County is it's a little bit of a mirage to other people who are outside of it. So there are really beautiful parts to where we live. But just like anywhere else, there's also extreme poverty in Orange County. There's there's tons of homeless. The divorce rate is super duper high, so tons of single parents. There's people with money, there's other problems that come along with that. So drug addiction and different things that people
everywhere.
lose their kids. You know what I mean? So everything that I think people are experiencing everywhere else in the country, we're experiencing that too.
Gotcha.
I just think California looks sunnier. And it is, right? It's sunnier, it's near the beach, so it does have this kind of perfect facade to it, but there's so many kids in our backyard who were in need of a home, and not necessarily from people that you would expect to lose their kids, So then it became this kind of obedience thing, because the foster system and facing if we were going to foster and adopt and do all that stuff, and all of the horror stories and the stigma and some of the very real realities of what families and kids were experiencing was really hard to say yes to. And I tell people all the time, I don't know that we would have said yes to it on our own without God saying, you need to do this.
What are some of those fears and hesitancies that you go, wow?
Well, I think we just felt unequipped, like as how do we handle a kid who, a baby who is detoxing off of meth? What do you do with that,
Totally.
Or how do you talk to a birth parent who has potentially lost their kids? How do you build a relationship with someone who looks at you as the enemy? Is that even possible?
Wow.
You've stolen their kids away. How do you love people or build a relationship in the middle of that? Our birth parent's going to come to our house and knock down our door and hurt Abby or, go crazy, because of some of the things that people were mixed up in. We were really afraid of some of the things that people were into, that forced their kids to be taken away, right? So there was just fears of oh my gosh, what are we getting into?
Sure. Because life was pretty sunny, right?
Yeah, I think for us, we had one kid. She's easy peasy. And, I was doing my youth pastor thing and Ron was doing his teaching thing. And he just... he was like, I don't know, this feels really messy. This feels really hard. I don't know if we're equipped to handle whatever they might give us. And I told him, I said, I think we just need to keep taking steps forward. And we just need to trust that God will close doors and give us clarity in what direction we need to go. So let's just have open hands. And he was like, okay. Because both of us walked away from that session, or that class we went to, feeling like, oh, we can't unknow what we know. There are so many kids in need. How do you forget that and just walk away? We couldn't. God just really put a clear... guys, you are gonna do this. So just move towards it. So it became more of an obedience issue than a family issue, or having kids or doing any of that. That's kind of where things really took a turn for us. Is we're like, wow, God's asking us to do this now.
And Ron kind of followed you on
yeah,
this decision.
definitely. It took him a little bit longer to get to a place where he felt like, okay, and I think we both were just in our own journey with the Lord. God was kind of speaking to each of us, and we were just trusting what God was saying to one another. And then I feel like God brought us together, where he was telling us the exact same thing. But I definitely think that I got there a little bit faster. And I think part of that is because as a youth pastor, I don't know if this will make any sense, but I honestly believe that people who are in phase ministry or life stage ministry would make the best foster parents, because you understand what it's like to love kids for a season. And so I could wrap my mind around loving a kid for a year or loving a kid for 2 years, right? Because that's my whole life. Is loving and nurturing kids in a season and then passing them along, right? And being a partner with a parent. So I think I had in my youth ministry background, it just gave me a little bit of a different vision.
Sure.
And so I think that's why I got there a little bit faster. I was like, okay, so we're gonna love kids for a season. We might be adopting them. We might not, right? We might be working with birth parents, we might not, so there could be partnership in here. So, and then I think Ron, again, God brought Ron to the same place, but it took him a little longer.
Talk about your marriage a little bit in that season. What is that doing? We've got people a little bit different pages, I think you're being really gracious, but when I've heard Ron's side of the story of this, he was literally like, he's kind of teasing, going, hey, let's don't mess with what's already going on. But what was that for your marriage? And if someone else is listening and maybe one of them is on, I really want to adopt, and the other one's, I'm not quite so sure, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things for Ron and I that we've always worked really hard to do is to understand each other's language. So Ron does the things that I need and the language that I need to hear from Ron are different than what he needs and what he needs to hear from me. And so I think Ron really only needs a couple of things to be happy, right? So he only needs 3 things
Sports.
from me. Totally, yeah. To know about his teams, no. He needs me to take care of dinner every night because it stresses him out to think about dinner. He needs a date night weekly because he needs quality time and quality connected time, and he needs something to look forward to. And so those 3 things, I work hard to do those 3 things for Ron, because if I do those 3 things weekly, Ron is happy. He just
happy
is.
Guy.
So those 3 things exist, and in kind of those 3 things are where I was just, let's have conversation about. So our date night was like, hey, let's just connect about this, or let's go for a walk. Let's go for a walk through some of these neighborhoods, or let's just kind of talk and just talk about what we're scared about. Talk about what are the unknowns that that are freaking us out right now. What are the positives too? So really, I think for me, it was just about asking him questions, but they were things that we were processing together. So even though he was like a no, like a no, we're not going to this foster class. And I just asked him, I said, this is something that I need. I just need you to come with me to this, because for some reason I feel like we got to go. And honestly, at the end of it, I feel like God will be clear with us and what we need to do next, So I think there was just some give and take there. And that's the one great thing about Ron is he's okay being in the give and take. But I just had to make sure that I was giving and not only taking. So
gotcha.
Even though he was a no and he was processing things, as long as I was giving, and not just trying to take from him, I think that helped us talk and process and have good conversation, and helped us both get to a place where we felt comfortable with being a yes.
So you were speaking, I'm respecting where you are.
Totally.
We're going to take baby steps.
Yeah.
I'm not going to overwhelm you. What would you say you needed from Ron during that time? Like, he needs the 3 things. What do you, and maybe just in any situation, need from Ron? Yeah, what are your 3 things?
So,
If you have 3.
Yeah, totally. Well, it's funny because for me, I need him to ask how my day was. So every day, because he's an introvert, so sometimes I need to give him some conversation prompts that will help him communicate with me.
Like it.
And he's totally fine with that.
Sure.
So how was your day really is usually the question he'll ask. I need a date night too, so quality time is a big thing for me. So that kind of checks something off both of our lists, which is really awesome. And then I need also like a quality family time, so that all of our family time isn't hustle and bustle. Like I need couch time also, you know what I mean? Like where we're just hanging out as a fam. But the how was your day really is, the bigger one for him, because he's a listener, don't try to fix anything. Let me just tell you how my day was really, so we've really broken down that question of like how we communicate in that question.
So you guys were kind of set up already for, you've got deposits in the bank from having date night all this time.
Yeah.
You're set up for conversation. You have a very literal place to have it.
Yeah.
During date day, and even at the end of the day, saying how was your day really. So that was all set up, and it allowed you to have not only the fun conversations, but obviously the hard ones. Because this is a hard one.
And I think processing with him, the one thing he needed was like, he did need to like talk about stuff and just talk about fears, and I needed him to trust me. So like that was kind of the big thing that I asked from him is like, I know what you need over here, and that's to kind of like talk about all this crazy stuff. I just need you to trust me when I am feeling like we need to try something or take a step or whatever. And so that was a good conversation. I remember us talking about trust, and when he was on the fence, I'm like, this might be one of those times for you just to trust me,
I love that.
And then we were just taking baby steps together, but God eventually brought our paths totally aligned, and that was a really sweet, strengthening moment for our marriage. Like when God asks you both to do something and you say yes to that together, I don't know, it's just a really sweet, that was a sweet thing for us. Like just embarking on saying yes to God.
So tell us about when you met Ella.
Yeah. So we got into the foster system. We've had 5 kids. We've kept 2. So we fostered 3 long-term, and then they went back to their birth parents. And then we have 2 that we've adopted out of those 5. So Ella was 7 when she came to us. She's actually the oldest one that we had. We had mostly babies.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, because people don't want to foster babies because they don't want to give them back. So there actually is a huge need for people to just foster babies. Again, this is where that youth pastor thing came into play, and that really served us well in the foster process because there were times where we were just fostering and not adopting. And so we really felt like God gave us vision for we can love a baby for a season and have a thumbprint and set that baby up to win. We can, and we can give that baby back, and so really grateful for that perspective because we were never like gutted or devastated in the process when we gave a baby back.
So how long would you have? Did you have the babies?
So we had our first foster baby we had for 18 months. So we got her at 5 weeks, and then we had her for 18 months, and we worked closely with her birth parents. We visited with them twice a week with the baby, and we learned a lot with that first baby. And we knew pretty early on she was going home. So her name was Nyla, and she, was just so sweet and so dear. And her parents actually lost her because of something that other kids in their family had done. So the parents actually hadn't done anything, but there was conflict in their home. And so we were rooting for them. We were, because they loved this baby, but they also had all this conflict with other kids. How do you choose between your own kids?
Sure.
Right? When there's conflict with kids. So it was just, our heart grew for birth parents and their journey. God gave us so much goodness with that first foster kid we had. His design is for kids to be with their birth parents. That is God's design. And I think we really clung to that with that first baby too. Like, God's design is for Nyla to be with her parents. It is. Like, that's what he wants. And we should be advocates for that. But if there is a kid who doesn't have parents, which is Ella was an orphan, basically, then we would love to be considered to be parents for the kids who need parents. So anyways, I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping around, but I that's an important thing about, I think, the journey is just entering into it with understanding that God is in control. We didn't request anything specific. We just said, whoever you want to send us, we'll take. We had an age limit just because of Abby, but we were like, we'll take any race, we'll take any gender, we'll take any age, we'll take any whatever's going on, we'll take it. So, and we just were trusting that God would bring the kids that needed to be in our care. That's amazing. So with Nyla, we were rooting for her birth parents. We were. They were healthy adults. They just had problems with some of their older kids. And so we worked with them for 18 months, and she went home. But before she came home, we got another little baby like 4 weeks before that. So that was the other thing, is God just kept bringing kids into our home. So even when kids would leave, we didn't feel a sense of like emptiness, or I don't know, God just kind of kept things going. So we got another little baby who was a meth baby. So Asia, and we had her for 18 months and detoxed her off of drugs, and her mom was in jail, and it was just a really tragic situation. But then an aunt and uncle in Texas, who were in a really good place, who had adopted all of her brothers, came into the picture to adopt her. And so then we released her after 18 months, and she was healthy and thriving and fat and all those good things, which was so great. And then Ella came to us. So Ella was 7. She was an orphan. She had been in 7 homes before we met her. She just had a really tragic story. Her mom abandoned her when she was 3. She never met her dad. What we know of her mom is that there was some mental illness there, but just abandoned her in a camper in a backyard at 3.5. And so she was found by a friend and bounced around the system, not because of anything she did. She went to live with an aunt and uncle, but the aunt became terminally ill. She went to live with a foster family, but then another aunt and uncle stepped up to adopt her. Then that aunt and uncle ended up abusing her. So then she went back to another foster family. So she just had all these unfortunate circumstances. Fast forward to the last home she was in before we got her, this family like promised they were going to adopt her. They had her for 3 months, and they just decided they didn't like her. So they just decided she was too energetic for a 7-year-old and asked too many questions, and she's just too tough.
She landed in the right energy, because one of the words I would use for you is energetic, right? So this precious little girl lands in your house.
She didn't even know we showed up to this family's home. She didn't know she was being transferred.
Okay.
And so we met her, and then the very next day, we picked her up. And we were actually only supposed to have her for a summer because they were looking for an adoptive home, and we had kids transitioning, so we just weren't sure if they were considering us for that. But when we went to pick her up that very next day, the family had put all of her stuff out on the curb, and she was out on the curb. Yeah. So that's like the kind of stuff that we're seeing and dealing with. Is just you've got these kids, these precious kids who have done nothing wrong, but you just have adults all around them making unhealthy and tough choices and that are just affecting them. It really just, for us, broke our heart in the best way. Like it really did. And just expanded our empathy and expanded compassion and just so many things. But Ella was only supposed to be with us for a summer, but we petitioned pretty early on, probably 2 weeks in. We were like, this kid's in Edwards. Like, she needs to be in Edwards. And she was an orphan. You know, she had no parents in the picture, and they were looking for an adoptive home. So we petitioned to be the adoptive home, and they said yes. They put us through some tests and some things like that, but at the end of the summer, we were headed towards adoption. So after we'd had her for 2 months.
Oh, how's her little heart during that? When I think about you just described what she'd been through, and thinking about her thing's been on the curb,
right?
And you guys picking her up. How was she? How was her little heart during that point?
One of the things that her social worker told us about Ella, which I love this, she said, you'll love Ella because she has hope. She still has her hope, which is a really big thing for kids in the foster system, because around 8 or 9, they start to lose hope that anybody wants them. And so she said Ella still has her hope. She wants a mom and a dad so bad. She wants a forever family so bad. And the second she moved into our house, she called us mom and dad. Like, she wanted it so badly. So she was in really good spirits, but I would say that the interesting thing about Ella that first summer is she so desperately wanted to please us. So I'll give you an example. Our family likes frozen yogurt. So we would go get frozen yogurt in the summer, like multiple nights. And she would always order one, but she would only eat the sprinkles off top. And so finally I was like, Ella, why do you only eat the sprinkles? And she was like, I don't like yogurt. And I was like, oh, Ella, why didn't you tell me? And she said, well, you guys like yogurt, you know? And so she so badly wanted to be part of a family, part of a unit, part of a people. So, and that was such a cool thing, because she had hope that, you know, that she was going to get those people. So that was, her heart was hopeful. There's so many layers to Ella. Like, you know, she was really scared, you know, because we made no promises of adoption, only because the family before had promised and then gone back on that. So that's the thing with kids in the system, is just, or even kids who are being adopted, is there's just layers that you can't see that they can express. But for us to be aware at a higher level of just what she's heard and what we say really, really matter. So she was so afraid until her court date that something was going to happen. So fear was the main thing we were battling back with her, and trust. Right. So she's 15 now, and Ron and I, we tell people this all the time. We're like, we think Ella almost trusts us, almost. It's just been a process, you know, a slow process over time. Adolescence really messed with her. So like her transition from concrete to abstract thinking. So we did therapy with her when she first came to live with us, and processed a ton with her. And she understood things in very black and white terms. My mom left me. I was adopted. I'm this, right? Everything was very black and white. To then now enter in middle school, right? Where your brain starts to think about things in a different way. And she was then asking, why did my mom abandon me? Why did I have to get it? Why is this my story? Why? I hate telling people I'm adopted. You know, I love you guys, but I wish you were just my real parents. Like, why did I have to have other parents? You know, so the layers for a kid who's been abandoned, you know, those things when we kicked into middle school and adolescence kicked up a notch as far as like her trauma and some of those types of things that we are walking through with her now. But she's awesome. Like, she is fun and witty and hilarious, and she could sit at this table with you and banter, and she's artistic, and, you know, she can build anything. She's got like an engineer's mind. She's smart. I mean, so she is, and she's ours, you know, so we adopted her 14 months later from when she came to live with us because the process sucks and it's super slow, but she's so ours. And there's so many times where I'm like, I feel like you're mine. Like, feel like we have the same blood. I always tell her, you're the best pregnancy I ever had. I'm so grateful. It was only like 6 days. It was awesome. From when we got the call. Like,
That's fantastic.
I tell her that all the time, best pregnancy I ever had. You're awesome.
God, you know, when I think about what think about, you know, that God says he adopts us, you know, I just think, and I wonder if sometimes we have a hard time, you know, fully accepting that adoption, fully accepting that he's wrapping his arms around us and he loves us and he redeems our pain and we're not abandoned and we're not weird. And I just think the beauty of the story of adoption, it just so translates into our relationship with God, and just even my own struggles of seeing him as good and seeing him as permanent and seeing him as full of grace and that you're safe, you know, because there's a safety issue, I think, with all kids.
Yeah.
You feel safe. And then in the middle, you guys, Cooper came onto the scene.
Yeah, totally. So then we had only fostered girls for some reason, and Ron was like, hey, I just have one request. He was like, can we just request a boy? I know we're not making requests and we're being open-handed, but he was like, do you think we could just request a boy?
He's so darn sweet.
Yeah, totally. And I was like, yeah, let's do that. So we called them, and this is the thing about this, we got calls all the time. That's actually the hardest part of the whole deal, is we got calls all the time that we had to say no to. Because we're just not in the right place, or we didn't have enough beds, or you know, we would get calls at least twice a month for kids to come, you know. So that was really challenging. But Coop, we called. I called one day and I said, hey, we'd really love a boy. If you have a boy come up, you know, not that we wouldn't take a girl, but you know. Oh, and a funny thing about this is once we started fostering our first baby, and Ron, like, I don't know how to describe Ron's like 180 in this situation, but that baby just like captured him, changed him. It changed both of us, but he was not allowed to take calls from the foster agency because he would say yes to kids without talking to me. And I was like, hey, like, we have to talk about this. Like, he was like talking about building bunk beds in our garage at one point to take in tons of kids. And I'm like, no, we're not going to have kids sleeping in our garage. Like, let's think about this, you know? So it's funny, like his 180 for, you know, in this process, because I think once we got in it and we understand that God was just with us, he just, you know, God just captured his heart through these kids. And so he was not allowed to take phone calls anymore from the agency because he said yes to one that I was like, wait a second. Anyway, so Coop, they called us within 12 hours. They had a baby, you know, for us. And we had also said no more babies because we're super old. And we were like, we're so tired. And so we really, the older kids.
She's not super old, by the way. Okay, good.
Older kids, we were like, we'll do older kids. But they had a newborn who was, he was 6 weeks in the hospital, and they wanted me to come pick him up in 2 hours from the hospital. And I was like, okay, I need to go. Okay, I need to get another car seat. I don't know if I can be there. So I ended up picking him up like 24 hours later at a group home. And yeah, it's funny, when I picked him up and we brought him home, there was something about him, I just kind of knew he was going to be ours. He had birth parents that were in really tough situations, really, really tough. Drug lifestyle, prostitute, and pimp was the dad. And they just loved him. They really did love him. And we visited with him twice a week with them. But they just did not want to do any of the steps, did not want to break out of the lifestyle, didn't want to make any changes. And so we knew pretty early on that we were going to adopt Coop, but it actually took 3 years for his adoption process to be finalized.
Wow, because they just couldn't let go.
The state just kept giving them chances, and we were just patient, because like I said, we just had a sense pretty early on that was going to go that direction. And I don't know, he just felt like ours from the beginning. But we worked really hard with the birth parents. We even worked hard to have a mediation situation with them, because with Ella, we have seen the effects of no contact or not knowing anything about her parents, and it's really hard for her. And so if there was a chance that Cooper could have some contact with his birth parents, we thought that would probably be the best thing for him long term. But they didn't show up to anything. They wouldn't sign anything. They couldn't they wouldn't drug test and do just some of the things we asked, and so it just was tragic. So 2.5 years after we got Cooper, we had the final visit with his parents. And that was probably one of our hardest moments.
I'm sure.
Of just being with them. So it was really hard. Just watching another mother, say bye to her child. It was just we feel honored that God has chose us to be Coop's parents for sure, but we also felt the pain of that situation. So that was a really tough one for us, but we have pictures of them, and we tried so hard to maintain a relationship with them. They just wouldn't reciprocate. So I think that was the hardest thing, and that's the hardest thing to tell Coop when he asks about it, is just, where are they? And we don't know. And, there's some of that kind of stuff that's just really hard for a 7-year-old to process, So, and he's been in our home since the hospital, so he hasn't known them, but he knows that that's part of his story. So, and Coop and Ella, even though Ella's 15 and Coop's 7, it's really beautiful to watch them. Like, there's a bond between them that's just, I can't put words to
I get
it.
you.
Yeah,
I know you.
They just do. They also drive each other totally crazy, but it's Coop's job as a little brother to drive his sister crazy. But there is something there that we just know exists between them, because it's hard for both of them in really different ways. So,
I wonder, I'm thinking through this story, thinking about the people who have Googled, how to support my spouse during adoption if they're at different spots. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, this brings a lot of clarity into a home of what's, important and what's just petty. I can't imagine that it doesn't do that to a degree, hearing these stories and you're going, and I get mad because you left a towel on the floor. Totally. Does it do that, or I don't want to imply anything.
I think like with our kid, with Cooper and Ella, I think with them, parenting them has always had a little bit of an added layer, but then there's also just total normalcy,
Sure.
So I think, there is, we totally get mad at them for towels on the floor. Who likes that? Nobody.
I'm talking about each other. I know you're getting mad at it. I'm talking about each other.
Oh, with Ron?
Yeah, like between the two of you. Like, how is that? How would you say?
Yeah, this fostering and adopting our 2 kids only brought us closer together and only strengthened us. And I do think we are a little bit more relaxed about some of the little things. Like, I do think it has brought into our marriage, we have such a gratefulness for our journey. We are so grateful for what God has done in us and with us and our kids. I think we really try to live in that gratitude space, because we just feel so grateful that we got to be a part of it all. But it also, I think, it did bring kind of a relaxed vibe into our marriage. Not that didn't exist before. Ron is a very relaxed guy, but it brought just new levels of comfortability with each other. It brought new levels of intimacy with each other. It brought new levels of desire of one another. Like, it really did kind of elevate all different pieces of our marriage, which was really cool. I think the intensity of some of the things that we were experiencing with other birth parents and stuff just drove us into each other's arms closer. I know that sounds kind of cheesy, but
no, not at all.
It really did expand some of these pieces of our marriage that, maybe other things could have, or time could have, but I don't know. It made us the things that we were seeing in our community only made us want to be more thoughtful about our own marriage. It only made us want to be closer and to not find ourselves in places of just some of these extreme hardship spots. And if we ever hit a hardship, we I think we're just so much stronger to face things together because of some of the things that some of the intimacy that expanded during that time. So even though the fostering and the adopting thing was focused on our kids, it actually began in our marriage. You know what I mean? It began with the obedience piece. It began with us being aligned with what God wanted for us. It began with us saying yes to each other and yes to God. It began with trust. So everything about the whole process began in our marriage. So our marriage played a really centric role in this whole process of fasting and adopting. Do you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense.
So it was such a central piece. We were so fiercely committed to date night. We were so fiercely committed to time. We're so fiercely committed to our sex life and some of those things that we just, as parents, sometimes allow to put on the back burner while you're parenting or whatever. You know what I'm saying? But it just drove us closer together.
Well, and to say we're going to keep these habits, because in the midst of all the crazy, because I don't think there would be one person on the planet that would go, Katie and Ron, they just don't date enough. They've got these they're fostering these kids, but their real problem is they don't date enough. I don't think there's no judgment coming your way. There's complete understanding, complete empathy. And there's not a lot of cues in our culture that says, hey, did you do your date night?
Right,
but for you guys, it was very lifeblood of your relationship and making decisions.
Yeah.
So it's just so key, and it just illustrates so much to anybody listening, whether they, that we got to have these things, because there will be times where we're going to have to take withdrawals from that account when it's tough.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think it just created this desperateness for one another, which I really appreciate, because I think that still exists, because we haven't fostered in about 3 years now. So we did it for 6 years. We had 6 kids, kept 2. Or we had 5 kids, 1 short-term, 6 kids, sort of, kept 2. And it's an intense process for your whole family. So all of our kids needed a break, because we all did visits together. We all did the whole thing together. We were all on the emotional roller coaster, and we had to take a break. So I could see us jumping back in at some point, but we haven't fostered in 3 years. And Coop's 7 now, so he's, his adoption's been final a while. But I would say that the same kind of desperateness for each other that was existing in that time, I think we're maintaining that, of just really, really just wanting to be with one another. And I just think that time just kind of fueled and fired that up in a really cool way. Because we had been married, I think, 10 years when we had jumped into this. Or 9 years or so. So, it's not like we were newlyweds when we jumped into it. So it just, I don't know, I feel like the same kind of desperateness exists. And where this is challenging for me as a mom, and someone who works full time, there's times where there's weeks where there's things happening and we're like, oh, do we do the date night? It's another night out from our kids. Do we do this thing? And so we've just figured out ways to be creative. And there's times where we send our kids out for 2 hours, like, hey, will you come pick up our kids and take them out to dinner? And we'll do dinner at home, just the 2 of us.
Amen to that.
So we're not out of our home, and the kids aren't away from us too long. And so on the weeks where things are really busy and crazy, we still make it happen. And we both really look forward to it. Just really, really look forward to it.
You used a really unique word that Katie, I've been working with married couples for a long time. I'm old, 17 years. Can you believe that?
Wow.
And I've never heard anyone use the phrase, we're desperate for each other. And the praise and worship song keeps going in my mind. I'm desperate for you. I'm desperate for you. That you were desperate for the connection. I'm desperate for who we are. I'm desperate for the support. I'm desperate for knowing that we're doing this together. I think it's just a beautiful image. Okay, what would you, we always want to give people one simple thing, and we know that this story, it's not a simple story, but in some ways it sort of is, in the sense of you felt called by God, and we simply need to take the next step. If we've got somebody listening and, maybe adoption has brought some tension into their marriage, maybe they're in a different place. What is one thing, if you could wish anything on all these couples that they could do that could help them get on the same page or feel support for each other?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I mean, I think, like I said, for us, our marriage was such a centric part to all of this. So if we weren't thoughtful and working on that above the needs of our kids, we wouldn't have been able to pour out the way we did into our kids. We wouldn't have been able to go into some of these intense places if we weren't strong ourselves. So I guess my encouragement would be to spend time together. Gosh, that feels so like cliche to say that.
Not at all.
But also to be thoughtful about questions that you need answers to. Like, I think sometimes we have unspoken expectations of each other or uncommunicated thoughts or feelings. So what does it look like to put some of that stuff out on the table? What does it look like to really be honest with how you're feeling? Which I think sometimes it's hard, right? We're afraid of our being rejected by our spouse or afraid they're not going to understand. But I think getting into some spaces, we had a couple walks where it was like, okay, you can say whatever you want. Like, how do we give each other permission to share how we're feeling? How do we give each other permission to really communicate with one another and really ask good questions? So I guess I would say, what does it look like to be in a space together where you give each other permission to be transparent?
I love that.
And transparency is going to lead to deeper trust, and trust is going to lead to I think, feeling peace in whatever you step into together. So I think in the adoption process and with all the intensity and craziness around us, we didn't feel that, at levels that I think we could have had we not been strong in our marriage. Because we were in a support group with other couples and we saw people falling apart.
Yeah.
We saw people just devastated in the process. We saw people in those spaces, and we were experiencing some of the exact same things. And the only thing I can pinpoint it towards was our intentionality and our thoughtfulness of one another. And that was just the key to adoption. That was the key to fostering. The key was, yes, we are going to leave kids tonight to go be together because we have to for our kids.
Right.
So if we don't leave and do this, our kids lose. And I think that's a mentality.
Wow. Say that one more time, because I don't want people to miss that. If we don't do this for our kids.
Right. If we don't leave right now for our kids, then our kids lose.
Our kids lose.
They just do.
It's, and we, with this organization, Orange, we're always, we say one of the best things you can do for kids is help their mom and dad's marriage, or mom and stepdad, stepdad and mom. It's so key. And you think, what are you going to bring into their lives? Because with all our kids, we have them a limited time. Right?
Yes,
we have a
totally.
limited time to go set them up to have the families that they crave and that they want, and you guys have modeled.
And I get I get as parents, that guilt and shame that, we give ourselves or put on ourselves, but that is not from the Lord. I mean, honestly. And so learning to release any of that connected to your date night or being away from the kids or going away for a night or going away for a weekend. We travel every other year together. Ron and I, we take a week-long trip somewhere awesome that we save for 2 years. And then we go just us without our kids. And there are people that will shame you for that. There are people that are like, you're not taking your kids to Hawaii with you? And I'm like, no, they don't appreciate Hawaii. We're not taking them there. Maybe when they're 30 and they get it, I'm not taking Coop to Hawaii, but I think there's people that want to shame that. Like, oh, you're not with your kids 24 hours a day. Well, that's, oh my gosh, But I just, again, God can do amazing things in seasons and in moments, and it doesn't have to be 24 hours a day with our kids to have a huge influence and impact. So I believe in being with my kids all the time, but I know that if I'm not with Ron, if we don't have that time, I'm not as good of a mom, and he's not as good of a dad, and we are not great parents without that connected time. It's just huge.
Perfectly said. Katie, this has been so rich. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I was so excited about this. So good to see you. All right. I can't wait for people to hear this. Thanks again.
Yes, of course.
Thanks for joining us this week for the Married People Podcast. We hope that today's episode helped you realize that marriage is a little easier than you think. And if you enjoyed today's episode, we would love for you to subscribe to the podcast through your Apple Podcast app or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And while you're there, we would love for you to leave us a review. Your review will help us make this podcast better. And finally, if another married couple came to mind as you were listening to this episode on adoption and foster care, you should consider sharing this episode with them. And the best way to do that is to send them to our website, marriedpeople.org/podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening.